Chapter 14. Priya.
When she stepped through the portal, Priya exited into a dim room. A metallic scent wafted to her on the air, reminding her of when she'd entered the gold mine in the Foundation with Roshan, Destiny, and Gemini their second day there. It had been pitch black, and a trap set in the wall had cut her in half. She hoped not to repeat that last part.
You have discovered the stockade. Plus 1,275 XP.
That didn't sound promising. Gemini? She whispered in the pitch black. Her voice reverberated and came back to her. Destiny? Priya squinted in the darkness until her eyes adjusted. The room must have been wide, because she couldn't see the walls on any side. Once, when she had been Delphine, she'd learned how to half-cast her spells, let them wane when her bar was half full, then continue casting. She'd become so proficient at the trick that her casting bar would fill halfway, then appear not to move. It was a trick she'd been practicing lately, and this seemed like a good time to try it out. Her hands turned in smooth circles before her chest, and a blue glow began to form.
You begin to cast Mana Burst.
The spell would grant her a 25% increased mana pool for 30 seconds if she completed it, at the cost of 25% life. And although it might not be the best time to toy with her life essence, she had no intention of completing the cast. When she scanned her surroundings under the bluish-white glow, the spell faded, so she redoubled her focus. The light bloomed brighter, revealing walls of huge granite bricks. Velvet-lined chairs that had seen better days sat at regular intervals around the perimeter of the room. A carpet that might once have been maroon was blanketed in yellow dust and ran down the center of the floor. It led to a massive wooden door of thick slats and black metal hinges. Her first step toward it extinguished her spell. She'd have to work on the trick a bit more, but in the meantime, she could see enough to get by. A noise floated to her from an unknown location in the dark. Her ears perked up. It was a loud scratching. She took some solace in the disruption of utter silence because it proved she could still hear. Plus, the timbre of the sound left little doubt it was coming from the other side of the door. It had a very different resonance than if something was scratching the stone walls inside. Her mind drew a recollection of a demon she'd cast into the void from Mora's dormitory in Warrington, and Caym's form that appeared through the portal. Hello? Priya tiptoed forward, her hands extended in front of her. The darkness receded just enough that she could spy her fingers, then the door. It was cold when she pressed her ear to it, and she jumped back suddenly when 2 long scratches ran along its outside from high to low, to high again. Her heart thumped against her ribs. She imagined a spider with long, ferocious obsidian claws. The realization she was alone suddenly weighed her down. For reasons she couldn't fathom, Priya's mind went to Jaran. His cute little nose, his slobbery lips, the thick hair he'd inherited from his father. Where are you, Gemini? And where the hell am I? She opened her party chat, but her interface rejected the attempt to send thoughts to her people. The clan chat gave the same result. A month ago, she might have longed for home. Maybe even her little dome in the dark wood, where Magellan would watch over her while she slept in utter safety. Although she'd never say it to Gemini, sentiments of security dwindled the day their son was born. She worried in ways she imagined only a mother could. Priya shook the thought away as another scratch reminded her of the presence on the other side of the door. You're not that girl from the dark wood anymore, she whispered to the dark room. You know who you are, what you can do. You're Priya Sky, once the mighty Delphine of Jara's line. You're a fierce magician. A memory came to her like a whisper across time, dim at first, a flash that quickly faded. Then it bloomed in her mind again, and this time it held. Her eyes bulged, her casting bar filled in an instant, and the world was cast in a red glow.
You have remembered a spell. Dark Sight. Type, spell. Cast time, instant. Cost, 25 mana. Duration, 30 minutes. Plus 450 XP.
The associated memory lacked context. She stood in a room of high ceilings with a fine glass chandelier overhead. Curved tables fit together to form a circle around her, and robed figures of all ages focused on her as she paced in the center. Priya didn't know why Delphine had been there, and she didn't know who the people were, but she was certain the place was at Warrington University. A name came on the breeze. The Magister's Concourse. This was how the memories came these days, in short bursts with little illumination as to Delphine's situation, her companions, or her purpose. It was like experiencing another's life with only images. No scents, no sounds, no other references at all. Another scratch snapped Priya out of her reverie. One corner of her nose twitched. "Fine. If you insist on goading me forward I will go." She reached for the handle, threw open the door, then jumped back. Torchlight filled the hallway outside from the left, but the passageway in front of the door stood empty. She poked her head out just far enough to peer in either direction. There were torches on the left, but darkness swelled on the right. Priya glanced at the other side of the door. No scratches. Was I imagining it? The hairy spider she'd imagined was nowhere to be seen. No giant demons. After a final glance back and a passing wonderment as to whether it might be better to stay in the security of a closed room with one entrance and a lockable door, she eased into the corridor. The walls here were constructed of massive stone bricks, and torches lined the walls every 50 feet or so. Priya considered taking one down, but opted to keep her hands free so she could use her staff or wand. After untying the former, she slipped it off her back. Then she tapped the wand slotted on her hip belt for the security of knowing it was there. What happened? How did I end up alone? And why weren't these your first thoughts? Priya wondered aloud. Gemini would set her straight if he were there, tell her to focus on the now. And he'd be right. Her ears perked up at a quiet clattering sound. A rat scurried by, hugging the wall. And another. Then a whole line of them. When she squinted into the darkness beyond the range of her dark sight spell, Priya understood why they'd risk passing at such close proximity. A tall figure lurked in the shadows. Despite her seeing spell and elven vision, the creature's head wasn't visible in the murky gloom, but she managed to spy a muscular gray arm sweeping into sight before snatching up one of the rats. Priya jerked. The arm disappeared into the shadows, then a short squeal echoed into the hall. After a few brief crunching sounds, the clawed hand reappeared. Long hairy fingers relaxed, then bloody bones clattered to the floor. Priya winked her eyes in succession to analyze the hunching creature, but its arms withdrew to the shadows. A second later, the hand snagged another passing rat, but this time Priya didn't bother with analysis. It didn't matter. She was alone, and standing in the middle of that dank corridor waiting for it to notice her wasn't wise. Maybe she'd have Gemini add a few points to her wisdom when she next leveled, but in the meantime, she needed to create space between her and the rat-eating beast. She was what Gemini called too squishy for direct confrontation. The heel of one boot clacked on the floor when she backpedaled. Priya winced and froze. Her cheeks tensed and eyes squinted. Then a low rumble crept toward her as the creature ambled into the halo of light at the outer range of her seeing spell. Its long, muscular arms were covered in thick black hair, matching the tuft over its jutting forehead, and a trail across its shoulders and down its back. A long snout sniffed in her direction. Its irises glowed red. Werewolf, level 44 shapeshifter. Cursed by the dark energy of Hokram to transform into foul beasts who must dwell in dark environments, werewolves feature razor claws known to rip through metal. Power rating, dangerous. What Priya would have given to have Gemini there so she could see the creature's attributes. Shivers filled her neck and radiated halfway down her spine as she recalled the violent attack that had left her cursed with lycanthropy. A thick voice filled the hallway.
A mirror of your inner self.
The lack of an echo in the long corridor and the way the voice grumbled inside her head instead of radiating to her ears made Priya realize the speaker used magic to project his voice. The timbre was familiar, the grumbling bass like the quaking earth the day the Foundation instance formed in the Surin hinterlands. It elicited another flash of memory. Delphine, waking in her chambers at the university to find the floating figure of the demon underlord above her bed, glaring down. Its mouth moved, but she couldn't hear the words. She glared at the werewolf, her quads tensed to run, but addressed the voice inside her head. I am not that thing.
But aren't you?
The light of her seeing spell dimmed in a halo around her, replaced by a black shroud that shimmered so it was like viewing the werewolf through smoked glass. Her hands trembled, her shoulders shot up, searing pain shot through her fingertips, and she raised one hand to find them splitting open. Thick blood flowed, then the tip of claws began to creep from the slits. She shook her head furiously and forced her shoulders down, but Priya couldn't tear her gaze from the werewolf's hypnotic glare. Her teeth clenched, her knees locked. When she balled her fists, the claws dug into her flesh as they extended. Her jaw jutted outward, stretching the flesh of her cheeks.
Stop it!
She barked aloud, but the voice carried the growl of a bear. Caym's voice spoke louder this time.
Let your inner demon flourish and serve at my side, Delphine of the Dark Wood.
No! Pain ripped through her forehead as it split open, then blood flowed in a river down her face. A rat scurried past, and the hungry desire to snatch it to satiate an overwhelming hunger forming in her hollow belly disgusted a remaining sliver of her rational mind. The werewolf's form faded to black. Only the irises remained as her body turned on her and pain encompassed her being. In a final, desperate reach for her sanity, Priya forced a mental image of her mother into her head, and even though the distraction only lasted for a split second, it allowed her the moment she needed. Her bloody fingers tore at the clasps on her robe. She shrugged it off her shoulders, then whirled as the light of Solara's tree bloomed from her magical ward, filling the hallway. You negate dark sight. The claws retracted, and the split in her forehead itched and burned as the layers of skin stitched themselves together.
Not here, princess.
The voice grumbled. The light glowing from her back dissipated. The warmth filling her body turned into a chill that brought violent shivers. When her senses returned, she whirled, then jogged a few steps backward while yanking her robe back onto her shoulders. The beast lurched forward, its claws scraping the stone floor as it closed. Priya's legs tensed, but even panicked thoughts about fleeing couldn't unlock them. A stream of rat blood dribbled from one corner of the beast's mouth, then splattered to the stone floor. Priya jerked, then reached for the wand at her hip. The low-level weapon might fail against the creature's defenses, but if she got lucky and turned one of its limbs to stone, it might buy her time to flee. If not, those long legs would chase her down in seconds. She kept her eyes low, never letting her gaze wander to the beast's eyes. The werewolf swung a claw as it stepped forward, and though she didn't look up, she could sense it measuring her. It turned its nose to one side and blew a wad of snot, then stood at full height, crooked its arms at the elbows, and drew them back. It bellowed a howl so fierce it blew wind through her hair. It took a lunging step forward, its claws held out. Priya raised the wand, then fired a bolt of energy. It closed the distance but swerved at the last moment and burst against the wall behind the werewolf. The beast lunged. She fired again. This time the energy impacted the creature's right shoulder, but instead of turning to stone, the light was snuffed out, absorbed by its gray skin. The wand clattered to the floor as she raised her staff and waved her free hand to conjure a fireball, but the beast screeched to a halt, its head tilted to one side. Then its eyes rolled toward the ceiling. The voice spoke again, but this time it originated from outside Priya's head.
Leave her.
The werewolf jerked, raised its hands, then curled its long digits as if something above would attack it. With a final glance, the monster turned and dragged its claws up the hallway in the opposite direction, eventually disappearing into the darkness.
Your ward won't save you in my realm, Delphine.
The voice rumbled with laughter.
It was a good effort, though. Resourceful little bitch, aren't you?
Priya didn't respond. She focused on the sensations in her body, waiting for normalcy to return.
Gather your friends and come, but the results shall be the same. Your bonds will not save you any more than your ward could.
She didn't stick around. As soon as she tied off her staff and recovered her wand, she turned on her heels and fled. With each clacking step of her boots, she winced, but didn't risk a glance back. The corridor seemed to extend before her, growing longer and longer, although more of the distant light ahead battled with the darkness behind. Torch after torch passed by, and the slightest sense of solace came with her immersion into their glow. She suddenly missed Rashan, not just in the moment, but in the larger sense, because she no longer resided with them, with the family. Caym had reached inside and tapped into the well of darkness she'd known she possessed since the first memories of her former life came in dreams. It left her wondering if Jara's desire that Priya have a guide in the light hadn't been well-founded after all. She finally halted when openings appeared on either side of the corridor. Around one corner, she spied silvery shackles dangling from a wall of flat stone. The barred door on this side hung open, while the other side was secured. Inside, an empty pair of restraints stood out against the others, which were occupied to capacity. The chains rattled as blood-stained skeletons of varying heights tugged violently upon seeing her, despite their hollowed-out eye sockets. They bit the air before them, their teeth clicking and clacking. Warmth engulfed her at the sight of the undead beings. Her energy surged and her stamina began to recover. Realizing such cursed minions could feed her shadow affinity's hunger forced her to swallow a wave of nausea. She was Priya. She was Delphine, a contradiction intensified by the hellish surroundings.
Embrace your power, Priya Sky. Let the minion's energy fill you.
Priya's attention drifted to the XP bar at the bottom of her interface. She chewed her lower lip while she analyzed a few of the skeletons. They ranged in level from 38 to 42. The horror of her disposition faded, then a smile bent her lips. The demon underlord was right about one thing. If she tied her destiny constantly to others and relied on them to keep her safe, she'd never honor her lineage. She had a son now, a man who adored her. Her line would carry on. But to fight against what she once was would deny her the power she needed to drive the evil that had once consumed her from the face of Rubal. She brought up the spell she'd remembered just weeks before as they battled in the Queen's Forest.
Dark Siphon. The caster calls on the powers of shadow to drain the life force from an enemy to replenish their own.
This was what Caym wanted, for her to feed her dark mana at the expense of these cursed beings. For her to experience the same rush she experienced just by seeing them, but multiplied. She pushed the door all the way around, tied it off with her belt to ensure it didn't close behind her, then stepped inside. The hatred filled her, uncontested. She let it fill her body with its cold grass and summoned the voice of Delphine.
You should be careful what you ask for, Underlord.
Raising her hands into claws before the highest level skeleton, purple light bloomed between her fingers, then over her wrists as she summoned her power from the magic essences of Enora that surrounded her in this dark place. The magic flowed easily as her casting bar filled.
No,
the voice inside her head complained. Delphine smiled.
You cast blind. The skeleton is blinded.
She waved her hands in a circular swirl, and the casting bar filled again.
You cast Drain Mana. The caster funnels mana out of the enemy's pool to refill their own. For each point drained, 0.75 is granted to the caster.
Delphine's mana topped off, but she continued to cast until the skeleton's reserves were emptied, along with the resistances that fed off them. She slid 1 foot back, crouched into her casting attack mode, then thrust both hands out in a violent push.
You cast Shadow Scythe. Critical hit.
A white blade of curved light shot from her hands and across the space, where it sliced 3 times in rapid succession. One of the skeleton's arms detached at the shoulder, then clattered to the ground. Priya cast again, aiming for the place where the spine joined the head, to the torso, but the skull didn't come free.
You cast Shadow Scythe. Skeletal Mage. Minus 143 HP. 17% HP remaining.
For good measure, Delphine cast Drain Mana, refilled her reserves, then scythed the skeleton until it was a pile of bones at her feet. Delphine closed her eyes, summoned an image of the boy-child awaiting her at the foundation to ground her in the light, then nodded. Her eyes shot open. Cold filled her bones in time with her casting bar, then she unleashed her will. Caym's voice swelled in her head.
How you disappoint!
Another pile of bones clattered to the floor.
Congratulations, you have reached level 40.
She shoved the announcement away with a thought and continued her dark work. By the time she completed it and cleared the cell on the other side, her XP had risen halfway to 41. Delphine lowered herself to the floor, folded her legs over one another, then meditated until the cold left her. Although its glow wasn't visible from beneath her robe, her ward's warmth radiated down her back and throughout her body as Priya's sky returned to Surin's depths. Gemini will be pleased, she finally said. She collected the bones from the unlocked cell and threw them down the hallway in opposite directions. There was nothing she could do about the piles on the locked side except burn them to dust, which she did. When her mana filled again, she returned to the hall and resumed her jog toward daylight. More cells appeared on either side as she went, but they held no occupants. Daylight brightened at the end of the corridor. Priya doubled her pace, pushing her stamina attribute to its limits. A damp scent came on a weak breeze, and her legs burned as she began an uphill climb. When she burst into the open, her boots landed on packed earth in a high, rocky cavern. A sprawling lake of clear water filled the gap between its shores. Streaks of umber, tan, and sienna soil stacked high to form the ancient walls on either side. The light she'd spotted from the corridor shone from above the rocky cliffs on either side, and she rejoiced in the sight of a blue sky. But the stones surrounded the lake on all sides, sealing her in. The dark hole of a cave mouth stared back at her from the opposite side, far across the lake. In the center of the water sat a platform beneath a shelter of polished wood that curved upward around the edges, like Gemini's samurai helmet. Because of the vast expanse of the lake, she couldn't see it clearly, but when she stepped to the water's lapping edge, she spied a figure with white hair sitting there, legs folded, hands resting in his lap in a meditative stance. Giles?